Hey everyone, George Christie here with Wine Industry Network. Welcome to the Wine Industry Sales Symposium. We've got 4 great sessions planned for you today. I hope that you can make every single one of them, but if you can't, don't worry. They're going to be posted on our YouTube channel. We'll be able to watch them later on. Now, before we begin, I want to thank our sponsors. Without their support, we couldn't offer educational programs like this for free. So beginning with our presenting sponsor, Red Chirp, our session sponsors, Avalara, Comerica Bank, Mather, and Wine Direct. And last but certainly not least, our supporting sponsors, Balzac, Copper Peak Logistics, WineIndustry.jobs, and Wine Industry Advisor. Now, our first session is focused on leveraging your data to make better pricing/depletion decisions. It's titled Using Data Analytics to Optimize DTC Pricing in an Inventory Depletion. We've got a really strong panel. I think you're going to enjoy this session. But before I kick that one off, I just want to remind everyone that we always pre-record these sessions a couple of days in advance. We do that for quality purposes, but we also do it to create a better opportunity for engagement. So presenters are watching this broadcast just like you are. They're in the chat room taking your questions on as they come in. So you don't need to wait till the very end to submit those questions. Literally, as they come to you, go ahead and type them in and take advantage of our panelists being online with you. Okay, I think that about covers it. Why don't we jump right into it? And once again, thank you for being with us today.
This session is sponsored by Mather Economics, the global leader in pricing and direct consumer analytics, and Nielsen IQ, big data for small business. Bizer, powered by Nielsen IQ, makes data and insights simple, affordable, and actionable.
You've got a lot to communicate, and if you can just get people to pay attention, you'll delight your customers and sell more wine. But people ignore emails and screen calls. Everyone does read their text messages, but alcohol regulations make compliance a bear. Use Red Chirp to cut through the noise. Convert website traffic into reservations and sales with web-to-text chat. Reliably reach members about customizing club orders, declined cards, and delinquent pickups. Exceed your sales goals with customized promotions that make everyone feel like a VIP. Securely collect credit card info 6 times faster. Reduce returns and no-shows with completely automated shipment notifications and reservation reminders, while order attribution automatically connects text to sales so you know what's working. Red Chirp is trusted by wineries of all sizes and integrates with your other tools. Get more leads, make more sales, and build stronger relationships with Red Chirp.
So we'll begin by introducing our panel. We've got Jim Maroney, who's the proprietor and founder for 6 Mile Bridge. Jim is going to be joined by Carol Rounsaville, who's the GM for Denner Vineyards. And last but certainly not least, we've got Bob Zertosis, who's the Executive Vice President for Mather Economics. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for being with us today. And I think I'm going to start with Jim. Jim, do you mind telling our audience a little bit about yourself and a bit about 6 Mile Bridge, please?
Sure, I'll be happy to do that. I had a career in media for about 40 years, which ended with me being the chairman and CEO of a publicly traded media company out of Dallas, Texas. And I retired from that in 2018. And a few years before that, had begun to get a winery started, 6 Mile Bridge Vineyards in Paso Robles, California. And we had our first vintage in 2016, opened our tasting room in 2020, and we're fully in business.
Tough time to open a tasting room, I think, huh? 2020.
Yeah, you know, I like to say that we didn't have to close because we were never open. But we've had a nice run since then, and really enjoying it. And if the people in this call haven't been to Paso Robles to do wine tasting, you need to come. It's fantastic.
Excellent, excellent. Carol, why don't you go ahead and go next and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, I have been the GM at Denner Vineyards for 15 years. I started with no winery experience with Denner Vineyards. I came from the food manufacturing background. I worked for a sourdough bread company for 18 years. So deeply instilled in fermentation in my life, in my career. Yeah, I've been there for 15 years, managing the business as it's grown from about 1,000 cases to 8,000 cases.
Wow. And Bob, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and Mather Economics?
Yeah, absolutely. George, thanks for having us. My name is Bob Trezadis. I'm the Vice President of Business Development for Mather Economics. I've been with the company for about 10 years, and Mather is an economics consultancy, which all that really means is that we focus on making our clients' data actionable and helping them achieve their business objectives. Mather's been around for about 20 years. We're based in Atlanta. We've got a team of 50 data scientists and economists. We are a global company. We are recognized as pricing experts, and our specialty is really DTC or subscription lifecycle analytics for our more than 200 clients and 600 titles. We work in a number of industries, publishing where we started, of course, but also sports, wine, telecom, environmental economics, education, lotteries, and more. And then, we jumped into the wine space about 3 years ago and really fell in love with the passion of the folks here and also their need for analytics.
Well, thank you, Bob, for joining us today. And, this has been a topic I've been looking forward to covering because as we have in the description, a lot of times, we base our pricing based on what our neighbors, the price of our neighbor's wine, and not a lot more thought, unfortunately, than that at times. But it's such a tricky thing, right? Because you want to maximize the opportunity to profit, but at the same time, you want to make sure that the wine lasts a certain amount of time. You don't want to sell out too quickly, and you don't want to have wines lingering for too long, right? Because you want to get into the next vintage. So I thought this was a really interesting topic, and I'm really glad we're covering it. I want to begin with a question for Carol with the pandemic and the impact on the supply chain, cost of packaging in particular. Tell me how much that's impacted your business and really made you think a lot about how much your costs have gone up and how you make up those margins.
Well, that's a great question, and I'm sure there's a lot of industries feeling that as well as the wine industry. And all of us are looking at ways where we can really effectively price our product so that we can make the best profit we can without turning people away. And I think that's something that became even more apparent during the pandemic, because all of your costs, your bottling, everything has, your bottling material, all of that has gone up. The costs in the vineyard, it's gone exponentially up this pandemic, and we're struggling to find a way to still engage people and make the wines approachable price-wise and capture some of that cost.
Right. Let me start with Jim. Let me toss this over to Jim. Jim, I know that the tasting room just opened, but you've been at it for a little while. And what's been the impact for you as we've seen, like with regard to your packaging costs being driven up?
Like Carol said, all of our costs have gone up. The bottle, the capsule, the labels, the packaging, the shipping, it's all gone up. And it makes the decisions about how you price your wine even more important than they would have been without all of this both supply chain problem and eventual inflation that we've seen in prices.
Yeah, I think unfortunately we don't just have the luxury of saying, oh, our cost of goods went up, $2.50 a bottle, so we're going to raise our prices $2.50 a bottle and expect that nothing's going to change, right? So it's a very tricky situation. And so, Bob, I'll throw this at you. And with regard to using the data to help make those pricing decisions, what sort of data do the wineries need to have access to be able to, really go through that process?
Great question. Actually, wineries have an amazing amount of data at their disposal. Their point of sale platforms have a ton of historical sales transaction data. You've got a number of wine club member information there. Also, then you can take and blend in macroeconomic indicators to try and help you determine what is being impacted by the pandemic or inflation or a host of other things. And then what we find is that the models that we've been creating in terms of price elasticity are very accurate for the wine industry. So we're able to, as Jim and Carol mentioned, we're able to build models and do predictive analytics for you. It'll show you what kinds of increases you can implement, should implement, and then what really do you need to stay away from for lack of demand, and you know, it might impact your depletion of your inventory in a negative way. I think one of the things that we like, and the reason that we're consultants, is that we get excited about hearing what their problem is. What's the challenge? What are you trying to solve for? And then we have all of your data, and we're able to work backward from that and make a number of recommendations. So that's the fun part for our consultants.
So for a lot of the wineries in our audience, they have limited resources, and they may not be in a position that they can go out there and hire a consultant like Mather. What kind of data should they be looking at to help them? Again, they may not be able to go into the same level of depth that they might be able to if they're working with a company like yours. But what sort of data should they be looking at that will even help a small guy make better decisions with regard to pricing?
Yeah, so I will tell you that we've done, from the perspective of being involved in the wine industry since we started, we did the research and really tried to understand and built our platform for the small to mid-sized winery, and that having that ability to consult with them is baked into the tools that we provide. So we know the costs are prohibitive in some cases, and we don't expect to make a ton of money off of our engagements, but we do, we do provide those services for those small to mid-sized wineries. Now, if you want to do it yourselves, we have encountered a number of wineries that do some really cool things. They do it mostly in Excel. They will do exactly what I mentioned as I was answering the last question. They're looking at historical sales transaction data. They're looking at how it's depleting, and they're building a rudimentary depletion curve. I think you're going to need some certain level of analytics capability to build a price elasticity estimate. And then on top of that, what we're able to do for them is create scenario planning abilities. So you can say, if we do this, how will it impact our depletion? How will it impact our revenues? And then, so that can be done. It's really about the investment that you want. I'll add one last thing to that. In some industries, they are very much, as you mentioned, want to do it themselves, but don't have the skill level. So then they come to us and they say, can you build us some models that we can then run ourselves? So there's many ways to skin a cat.
Interesting. Carol, I'll throw this one at you. It's, you've been in this role for the last 15 years. And obviously in wine, there's a lot of instinctual decisions that are made, right? You just have a gut feeling, and I feel like we're going to do a little better this year, so we're going to make a little bit more, or I think we can get a little bit more. Tell me a little bit about how you're able to integrate decisions that are based on the data that you're analyzing, coupled with, just a gut feeling, just pure experience.
Well, I think, the pandemic really put my gut at a loss, for us, because I felt like I had a pretty good idea of how we were operating. And then the pandemic came along and it kind of threw all of that out the window. And so you do really have to, before, I think we were going by gut, and we were looking at our decisions and our pricing models and spending a lot of time looking at what other people were doing and trying to figure out where we fit into that model for Paso Robles. And then when Mather came along, we really then focused on our data and really started looking at how we're operating, and really focused on what we are doing rather than what's happening around us and what works for us. I do think, and I want to say this to what Bob just said, the nice thing about Mather is it is consistent, and finding skilled staff to do data analytics in any area right now, staffing is tremendously challenging. The nice thing about Mather is it's consistent, and that you have somebody who has seen your data and is analyzing it and and knows your history. Whereas sometimes that's why I like outsourcing it versus having someone in-house do it, because everybody wants to put their own spin on it when they do it. And, I changed this up. And you're like, no, we just need the history to continue so that we can track our progress, So for us, the instinct and the gut instinct, I think there's some part of that we really do need to include in the decision-making process. There's things that we know about our vineyard and whether we're going to take out a block or replant a block that we will put into that decision-making, and knowing how much our production levels are coming down the pike. That's kind of some of the gut hunches or some of the data we look at as well. But I do think that you do have I'm prefacing this with the pandemic. I felt like before the pandemic, I had a real sense of our rhythm as a company and our growth and how to handle it. And the pandemic did really put a big spin on that, and that we have leaned on Mather even further due to that.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Jim, I'm going to throw this to you. So a little bit newer to the game. So one of the good things about that is that you're not necessarily caught up in that whole idea of like, we're doing it this way because this is the way we've always done it, right? So that's something you see in the industry across the board, and it's tough to get away from that. So when you launched and you started looking at your pricing, you didn't have a lot of data to look at, really, right? Because you were just getting going. So how did you go through the process of making those pricing decisions early on?
Well, I will tell you that the first prices we put were a little bit of what I call Kentucky windage. You just kind of, put it up there in the air. And we made prices, but it wasn't literally into the first vintage where we were running out of our Cabernet sooner than I wanted to, and not having even another vintage to put into the tasting room. I really needed to keep the tasting room open because it was our best channel for signing up people to our allocation list. So I contacted Mather. I'd worked with them for over a decade in my previous career, and just said, hey, can you guys help me figure out how to take the price of this Cabernet up so that it won't deplete before the next vintage is going to be available that I want to put it on the market. And they said, sure. And they basically used a lot of demographic and data of the customers that we'd had so far, and came back and told us that our $85 bottle, if we moved it to about $120, wouldn't run out before September. Well, I believe in Mather, and I believe that they were exactly correct, but I took a little gulp at the $120 because here I am in Paso Robles 1 year into the business, and suddenly starting to price my wine at the low end of Napa didn't seem like a smart thing to do. So I said, all right, well, let's stay under 100 and take it up by 20%. Mm-hmm. I'm sorry, we were at $80. So we took it up by 20% to $96. And they said, that'll buy you about 2.5 more months, and then you're going to be out. I said, well, that's better than where I am today. And I said, by the way, what kind of volume am I going to lose? They said, none. You've got that much headroom, that much price elasticity in your $80 price, that at 96, you're going to slow down sales, but you're going to sell out all of the wine. So we moved it up literally the next day in the tasting room. And about 2.5 months later, guess what? We ran out of Cabernet, but at least we had the data to make the decision, to take the emotion out of it, to take the guesswork out of it. And it was classic Mather, as I've worked with them for a decade.
Mm-hmm. So Bob, kind of go back to you when you're looking at these models to determine, the elasticity on some of the pricing models that you're working on. Talk a little bit about how you are able to use that information to make decisions based on channel, whether that's, right out of the tasting room, a wholesale, or even wine club. Talk to me a little bit about how you look at the different channels based on the data that you have.
Well, George, unfortunately, you've got the wrong guy on this call. If you're looking for me to go too deep into this, I can bring 50 economists and data scientists with me, but I will give you a high-level overview. We do really try and start with the end in mind. Jim told us what he wanted to do. We had all of the data, we had it clean, prepared, and then we understood the price elasticity and how that was going to affect depletion, and then we worked backward from there. The benefit to, and all the kind of things that Carol and Jim have said, the benefit to us doing the work for you and outsourcing to us is that those questions get answered in a matter of hours or days rather than now knowing what you need to do and starting to pull files to build some sort of a projection.
Mm-hmm. So Carol, I'll come back to you now. So you've been leveraging the data to make some of these pricing decisions. Talk to me a little bit about some of the changes that you've made or the decisions that you've made based on analyzing the data a little different than you have in the past.
Well, I think a good example is the pandemic. For us, we were really concerned about raising prices during the pandemic when we released wines, because we thought, wow, people are going to be scared. We don't, as Jim mentioned, there was a lot of emotion in looking at that. And Mather recommended that we did increase it. And so we did the gulp, as Jim mentioned, and took the plunge and raised the price. And it worked out just fine there. It flowed as it was supposed to. And so I think, taking that emotion out of it and allowing the data to speak to what you should do really is highly successful. And I think you do need to take the emotion out of it. It's hard.
So tell me a little more detail as to what data were you looking at and what did it tell you? What was it about the data that said, oh, we could take the price up
So they take your wine and they take your production level and they build a model that shows you, okay, if you price it here, you're most likely to sell out this point. Price it here, then you'll sell out at this point. So you have 2 or 3 lines or 2 or 3 models they give you to say this is where you'll end up. And so, your goal is to end up selling out right when you release the new wine. So that works out really well. That's a perfect scenario. And so we raised the wine up. In this example, $5 for each of the releases, and they have met the line. They equaled the line that Mather had forecasted for them. Mm-hmm. So it worked, and it worked to our advantage to have the $5 more per bottle, because of course it doesn't even cover the costs that you have experienced lately. Yeah. But if we had not done that, if we had said, oh no, we shouldn't raise our prices like we would have done instinctually during a pandemic, then we would have been out that money that we can use.
So now, George, as we're looking at the price elasticity of each SKU, we're able to see exactly which ones are more sensitive to price, ones that are least sensitive to price, and that's a price elasticity calculation. I mean, it's economics 101. So when we're doing that, we're able to kind of help project what they want to do. So they can look at, where Carol said 5. If she had said, well, what would we do if it had gone to 10? And our side of the house, she's the wine expert. We are the data experts. So we're able to provide kind of, this is what the entire portfolio looks like. And they're all going to be different in most cases.
Right. So
look at that and make some decisions. You can A/B test, as Jim said, where we might tell them there's enough runway to take it to 120. Didn't feel comfortable doing that. I'll throw out a couple of additional things where you talk about how can that data be used. That data can be used to look at production planning, shifting levels of sales mix from wholesale to DTC. If you have 2 SKUs that are sort of substitutes for each other, and one demand is not as great as the other, you can use pricing strategies for both of those SKUs to kind of level it out to achieve the goals that you want. So it's really about kind of having all that data ready and being able to look at it and say, what am I trying to accomplish? And then working backward from that.
Well, and I imagine just to add an added layer of complexity is if you're actually looking to grow. So if and I'll pick on Carol for a second. If she says, "Oh, we're at 8,000 cases, but we want to be at 15,000 cases in 5 years," I have to imagine that that's going to have some impact on how she should be pricing, knowing that she's looking to grow. So, is that something obviously you're able to take into consideration?
I think that really helps, George. When we were looking at, we're actually looking at growing a bit, and so we're taking that into consideration with our pricing and talking to Mather about that. Also, if you were a winery that wanted a spectrum of price points, let's say you wanted $45 to $120 bottle of wine on your spectrum of what you offer, then I think Mather can really help you determine what those price points look like for which wines, and build that model for you.
Jim,
George,
looked like you had something to add there. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to add, when you talk about getting to a number of bottles, you might also want to be saying, well, what kind of revenue do I want to get to? And that question has, in a sense, two answers: volume, more bottles, or price, rate, if you will. And when you add more bottles and you sell them, you make more money, but there's a lot of cost in that. When you raise the price per bottle, that all goes to the bottom line. There's such an incredible amount of operating leverage in raising the rate that as you think about your growth, I would just urge people, they may do this anyway, to be thinking about your revenue goal as much as you may be thinking about your bottle growth goal, because the rate's going to have more to do with your profitability in a short run anyway than will the growing of the bottles. And Mather, again, can give you the confidence to raise that price and understand what it's going to do to your volume and whether you're going to come out ahead or behind by raising the price, and by how much.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point.
Jim is spot on there. We begin with the end in mind, and you tell us what you're trying to accomplish. Is it the bottle, or is it the bottom line revenue? And then we can build out the recommendations. And we can also teach you how to do that. So it's not necessarily, an entire process that we keep behind a curtain.
No, of course not. But I think it's, the fact that you have some tools in your, that available that you can leverage, obviously makes that process a little bit easier. But, as I said in the beginning, not everyone may have the resources or to work with a company like Mather. So we want to make sure this is as relevant to them as those companies that do have the resources. But let me throw this at you guys. So much of our industry is impacted by third-party endorsements, the public relations, the PR attention that you get, what the writers might say, the scores you might receive, the awards you might win. How does that factor into some of these decisions that you're making? And who would like to take that? Who would like to kind of take that one?
I'll take a history of the awards and the scores, because we did get a few awards and scores. We got number 11 in the world with Wine Spectator, and number 16, I think, on the list of the top 100 wines. And I would say back in the day, that really did affect your sales. When it happened to us the first time, we just saw a run on the website and we're like, what's happening? We had not even heard yet. And now I don't think that scores are such a big pull anymore for people finding wineries and pricing. I don't think people really look at scores for pricing that much anymore as well. I think that it gives them a general idea of what to look for, but it's not like the Bible of what you should be paying and what you should be tasting. Right now, I think people are really listening to, because of social media, listening to recommendations, of what they hear and see that's good in Paso Robles. And, that's where we see the most influence of our new guests.
Mm-hmm. we talked a little bit at the beginning about, looking at what how your neighbors are pricing their wines. And Jim, you sort of referenced, being a little bit nervous, given the neighborhood and maybe the average price of wines in your neighborhood. Are you still looking at competitive pricing when you're making these decisions, or are you just taking the data in consideration and not really worrying about what your neighbors are selling their wines for?
No, actually, we are just looking at the data of our own customer base, because those are the people that are going to be buying our wine, and either they have giving it an intrinsic value related to the price, or they're not, and they won't buy it. In the beginning, I looked around because I kind of wanted to see what the pricing was like around where we were located in Paso Robles. But since then, I just stick with looking at Mather for help when I need it, and going off that. Our customers are similar to theirs, but they're not identical, and their ability or willingness to pay for a bottle of wine depends on so many factors. In this area, we focus just on the Bordeaux varietals, whereas a lot of other wineries, particularly along Peachy Canyon here, focus on Rhone varietals. So that differentiates us a little bit just that way.
Uh-huh. Now, Jim, you've got obviously your taste room. I assume you've got a wine club. Do you do any wholesale business as well?
No, the model, we're very small, George. I should have said this in the beginning. We're at about 1,200 cases. A couple of years we'll be at 2,000. We'll probably end up at 4,500 to 5,000. That's about all I want to do.
Yep.
And so that model, being as small as we are, is completely dependent upon having a DTC, sales model. If we're selling and I think everybody on this call knows that if you're selling to a distributor, if you're selling even to a restaurant, your margin goes way down. And for us to be able to be profitable at these kinds of levels, we've got to sell virtually 100% of our wine directly to consumers. So we do that through the tasting room, and then we do that through releases online directly to people who are on an allocation list. We're not a club model. We're an allocation model.
Mm-hmm. So when you took your price increase, any noticeable impact at all?
None whatsoever. Literally, like I said, we did it overnight, didn't communicate it, just did it. And, it slowed down a little bit in sales, but that's exactly what I was trying to do. I wasn't trying to not sell out the wine. I just didn't want it to sell out as quickly. And that's what Mather's data said would happen. And it did. And I continue to constantly use them to look at the different inelasticities of our SKUs from vintage to vintage. It can change. I would say this to anybody on this call. If you haven't raised your prices in 3 or 4 years, 2 or 3 years, there is almost certainly some inelasticity built in, meaning that as you raise that price, you're going to see very little effect on volume. And I would really urge you, whether it's with Mather or some other similar company, to get some data on it, because you're leaving some profit on the table. That's about the easiest thing to get, which is just change your price.
Mm-hmm. And Carol, what about you? When you took your increase, what kind of reaction did you get from the different channels?
We do a little bit of wholesale, and I think it gets harder and harder as you get up there in price. Our average price of our top tier wines are $85. But our club members, I think we did notice a little bit of moving away from being a daily wine for people to being a special occasion wine when you get up above the $80 point. And so we balanced that with offering a club that was not so many bottles, so that it was still accessible to the people. There is some comments you get from people who have been with you for a long time, who started at $35 a bottle and now it's $85. Yeah. Definitely you hear some comments, but it doesn't stop them from buying. We don't get a lot of it's just a little bit of grumbling, which I can certainly understand.
Yeah, I mean, and sometimes I imagine it's just that they're not going to be a customer at $85 a bottle, right? And that's just sometimes the way it goes.
We have our average club member is 5+ years, so they've been with us for a long time, and they see the changes. And when you go from, I think when I started it was $35 a bottle to $85 a bottle, there are going to be some people that opt out.
Yeah, yeah.
But you also get new members.
So sadly, not everyone out there is in the position where the solution is to raise your prices, right? Because there's a lot, probably more examples than not, of wineries who are selling wines when, of a particular vintage when they should have already been on the next vintage or even 2 vintages behind. So Bob, talk to me a little bit about those conversations, and because they're probably not in a situation they should be raising prices, right? So does the same analytics come back and say, you know what, you're at $85, you should be back at, if you want to get back on track, you should be down at $55. And then furthermore, do you have discussions about how to do that without doing irreparable harm to the brand?
Yeah, I think that's a great question as well. And absolutely, the inverse really works as well. So it's, if you're looking at it, you're depleting and it's going way longer than you need it to go, you can tell us what is the target, where do we need to go, how do we need to get there? We can show you those types of things as well. But there's more than one way to get to a revenue number. And so we can look at the relationship between your club member acquisition and also your churn, and try and squeeze those two numbers closer together, or move them in a different way so that your revenue number goes up in that way without necessarily having to rely on pricing every time. You asked the question about the kinds of data used. And so when you're looking at things like churn and acquisition, you're going to look at the member characteristics. You're going to look at, for risk of churn, you're going to look at, are they local to a winery? Have they been to a tasting? How much do they customize their orders? Do they pick up from the winery? Is their spending accelerating or decelerating? What type of club are they in? What level of spend? What types of wines are they purchasing? As well as the macroeconomic indicators. And then from that, you can determine how sensitive they are and their risk of churn. So you can create a score and tailor your messaging to that specific risk, rather than doing a generic outreach to everyone where you might cause friction for those that may not be at risk at all. We did some really interesting churn campaigns with Carol and her team. But I think the thing that is very valuable to wineries is to understand what are the drivers of churn, so that if it's an internal behavior that they're not aware of, they can change that so that it changes your risk of losing that customer long before you send out any sort of a touch point.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's talk.
One last thing I want to throw out there. Everyone that we come in contact with, they have strategies and tactics that they implement in terms of acquiring new wine club members, or in terms of preventing churn. Well, I think the thing that we're able to help our clients do is look in that data and tell you what of these 3 things that you're doing, 1 is really working well, number 2 is not working quite so well, and 3 is just a waste of your time and money, so stop doing that. Or here's a third option that you can use instead.
So I like what you're saying, but can you give me like a little bit more specifics around, like maybe an example of that, kind of help illuminate the point you're trying to make with regard to the point you're making with things you should be doing, not be doing, wasting your time. Like, talk a little bit more about that in detail.
Sure. So here's an example. If you are sending out a communication to your wine club members, and you're offering them a discount to make a purchase, and in that particular, and you're trying to drive e-commerce, for example, if that is someone who would have made that purchase, you have given them a discount that you don't need to do. If you are offering free shipping or XYZ, and we can tell you that you don't need to do that, then you can maybe test some of those tactics, which retains part of your revenue. So it's really about understanding the revenue goal, what you're currently doing, and then let us look in the data and tell you how you might be able to adjust.
Yeah, those are really good points. I think that, that wine club channel is such an important revenue driver for, wineries, particularly smaller wineries, that being able to analyze how well some of the tactics that you're employing are working, right? If you're offering free shipping when you don't need to, you're giving away a lot. It's just, that's pure profit, right? That you're giving away, right? So it's interesting. Well, this has been a really interesting conversation. I mean, a big takeaway for me is, removing some of the emotion from decisions that you're making, and really looking at the data and helping that drive those decisions, or at least be a more important part of the conversation. But we're kind of running out of time here. But Jim, do you have any parting thoughts for the folks in our audience who are looking at, probably having a lot of same thoughts that you've been having with regard to, am I pricing this properly? What might I be able to do differently? What sort of advice do you have, or parting advice do you have for the folks in our audience?
I just think my parting advice is that if you haven't tried to harness the power of data, and then data put into econometric models, arithmetic kinds of models, you're leaving a really powerful tool out of your toolkit. And whether, again, it's with Mather or you hire somebody, I really urge you to do it. I think you'll be able to see a return on investment of whatever that cost is in a very short period of time. Taking the emotion out of something like pricing, which is a very emotional decision for at least most businesses, is really important. I'm a 10-year plus fan of Mather, so I know they can do it. I'm sure there's others out there.
Yep. Carol, same question. Have any parting advice for our audience today?
Yeah, I think with the national economy, the way it's going, and the way things are happening, now's the time to be even more strategic in your process. And it's amazing to me, if you just do the math, how much you can make by doing this, by employing somebody to look at your data and help you make a decision that's objective on your pricing, rather than looking around at your neighbors and hoping to hit the bullseye for your price point. It just works. I don't know what else to say. It works and it's effective.
Bob, last question for you. Predictive analytics, are they here to stay in the wine industry?
What was the question again?
I'll just hit you. Bob, last question for you. Are predictive analytics here to stay in the wine industry?
I think they definitely are. From our perspective, we hear. Let me do that again.
Yeah.
So we'll start over. So I think so. So having actionable data at your fingertips, or a phone call away, or whatever, really changes the way everyone thinks. Once you have the models and the forecasts and understand how that you can use that data to make decisions, I think we see the light bulb go on, for lack of a better term, and people get excited about asking more and more questions. So if you're a fan of data, then you'll be really excited. If you don't really understand it, that's okay. We want to explain it to you. And then once we explained it to you, you're going to get so excited, and you'll be a fan forever.
That's great. I do have one last question for all three of you. So I'm taking the price increase. Do we take it on new vintage or on a particular date? Carol?
Vintage.
Jim? You got.
I'm going to start over. Sorry.
That's okay, right? Okay. Final question. Decided that's it. Mather's convinced us we're taking a price increase. Do we take it on vintage? Do we take it on a date? Carol?
Vintage.
Jim?
Vintage.
Bob, you agree?
Let the data tell it.
Good answer, Bob. Good answer. Well, I want to thank all three for joining us here today. Really interesting session. Once again, I want to thank all of our sponsors for your support. And I want to thank everyone in our audience for spending some time with us today. Stick around. We've got another session coming up in just a few minutes. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, George. Thanks, George.